So now we're on Daf Zayin. Daf Vav. Is Lishni Basroi Kamashmul. Shmuel wants to teach us not Harei Mekudeshes Li, because that's obvious, that's a perfect language of Kidushin, but rather Hareini Ishech, Hareini, or if he says Eini Ishech in the case of Gerushin, that's not valid at all. That's the Chiddush of Shmuel. So now the Gemara identifies the source of Shmuel. Hacha, in the case of Kidushin, Ksiv ki yikach v'lo sheyikach es atzmo. V'hacha, in the case of Gerushin, Ksiv v'shilcha v'lo sheyishalech es atzmo. So the Torah goes out of its way to indicate that the Baal, both in the cases of Kidushin and in Gerushin, is the active agent, and it's ki yikach. But if he's yikach es atzmo, if he says hareini balech, etc., then he's not taking her, but he's sort of taking himself into the marriage. He's got to take her into the marriage. And the opposite in Gerush. Ton Rabbanon, Hareyat Ishti, Hareyat Arusas, Hareyat Knuyali, Mekudeshes. These are all perfectly valid languages of Kiddushin. And that's the first three in the list of this Brisa. Now the Brisa lists another three perfectly valid languages of Kiddushin. Harei at shali, harei at birshusi, harei at skukali, mikudeshes. So the Gemara asks the obvious kasha. V'lisninu kula b'chada. Why did the Brisa separate between the first three Lashonos and the second three, set up two bavos, and Harei and Mekudeshes in both? Why not just swallow them up as a list of six? And the Gemara says the technical answer to that question, Tana tlas, sham inu v'garsin. The way the Torah was transmitted in this particular context was these three Lashonos and those three Lashonos. Now, the question obviously bothers the rational mind. Why was it transmitted in that particular way? And the answer, it seems to be, is that in the first three cases, we are using an absolute lashon of ishus, whether it's ishti, arusasi, or mekudeshes. Those are all classic languages, and also knuyali. But in the case of shali, or birshusi, or zkuka, these are all kind of spin-offs of kinyanin. These are like dimensions of kinyanin. Iboilu, who the Gemara has a suffix miuchedes limahu. So Rashi points out that the pasuk regarding the marriage between Adam and Chava says v'hayu lebasar echad, and the word miuchedes is indicative of that pasuk echad, miuchedes echad, or miuchedes li, says Rashi. Then we find the marriage relationship of Yud in the case of Omevriya, and there the Torah says Ye'adah. As Rasi, again getting back to Adam and Chava, Eselo Ezer Kenegdo, Negdasi Kenegdo, Mal. And again, the Gemara goes on to ask other questions. Atzu Rasi Mahu. When the Torah speaks in Shmuel Aleph Perkaf Aleph, it says Ki Isha Atzura Lanu. Alternatively, Rashi says that that Atzurasi is a lashon of nesefes imi babayis, right? The word atzeres means to gather together. So we're gathered together in one house. Tzalasi, again getting back to Adam and Chava, the Torah says that Vayiskar, that he took a tzela and he built Chava from the tzela. Skurasi, the Torah says Vayiskar basa, tafta, in the context of the marriage between Adam and Chava. Tachti mahu, right? It says Vayiskor Bosa Tachto, Tfusasi Mahu. So what does Tfusasi mean? Why would it be a lashon of Kidushin? Well, in the parsha of Sota, in Parshas Naso, it says V'shachav ish osa shichva zorva hi lo nitfasa. So tfusa means a conjugal relationship. L'kuchasi mahu. The Torah says ki yikach ish isha pshot miachada. This whole list of how many do we have? I think it was 7. So we can take one off the list. Why? Does Sanya have a brayso that says Omer l'kuchasi arei zu mekudeshes mishum shenemar ki yikach ish isha. So again, if we were studying the sugya v'iyun, we'd have to go through each one of the lashonos and really analyze why the Gemara vacillates and why, in the case of kicha, is that more of a clear, certain language of Kidushin than all the others. Iboilahu charufasi mahu. After all, the Torah says, Isha nechrefes li'ish. And that refers to a chetzio shivcha chetzio bas chori, where you have 2 partners in a shivcha knainis, and one of them was Meshacher, his half, and she's called a Shivcha Charufa. And the Torah discusses what's the status of someone who has bia with a Shivcha Charufa, and what korban he has to bring as a kapara. So the Gemara says, Toshma desanya Omer, meaning a man says to a wife, Hare at Charufasi Mikudeshes. Shekain b'Yehuda korim la'arusa charufa. The minhag is in the language and the lexicon in Yehuda that the word charufa means arusa. Frek the Gemara of Yehuda haviru b'alma. Can we decide for the rest of the world based on the fact that in Yehuda the word charufasi is used interchangeably with arusasi? Hachiko, but rather this is what the brayso means. Ha'omer charufasi mikudesa shenemar vehi shivcha nechrefes li'ish. V'od, and furthermore, I'll prove it to you because Yehuda korim larusa charufa. Frek the Gemara, Yehuda v'od lekra. You quoted a pasuk to prove that charufasi is a language of Ishus, and now you have to tell me what they do in Yehuda? Elahachi kamar ha'omer charufasi b'Yehuda mikudeshes. Where do we establish that the lashon charufasi is vadei a clear-cut language of Kidushin? That's only in Yehuda. Shekain b'Yehuda korin larusa charufa. But elsewhere, beyond the boundaries of Yehuda, then the word charufasi is not necessarily indicative of issues. You had these long list of lashonos of Kidushin, and you didn't know whether or not he meant Kidushin or not. He wakes up and he says to her, Hareat Charufasi or Hareat Ezrasi and Fusasi, etc. I mean, Mino Yodo my Karmala. The lashon of Kedushin has to be crystal clear such that she has das makna to enter into this marriage. But what? By process of elimination, he didn't wake up one day out of context and say Areat Charufasi, but rather it was when they were talking about getting married. Is then the Gemara says, I don't understand. I have the exact opposite question. Afal Gavdalo Omar Lo Nami. Even if he didn't use an absolutely clear language, it doesn't matter. For sure, she understood what he said. They were talking about getting married. And therefore, if she accepted the Kiddushin, for sure she is Mekudeshes. Tisnan, and how do I know? To prove to you that b'medaber imal iske Kiddushel, it's valid. Tisnan, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Perik Daled Oyu medaber ishal iske gita v'Kiddushel v'nasan lo gita v'Kiddushel v'lo perish. Rabbi Yossi Omer Dayo. Rabbi Yossi recognizes this as a valid Kiddushin. even though he didn't say to her, I'm giving this to you for Kiddushin. We don't need that explicit verbal declaration because it was Oskim Yoso Inyan. And Rabbi Yehuda dissents, and he says, Tzarech lefarish. She has to say, I am giving this to you as Kiddushin. We reject Rabbi Yehuda l'halacha, we accept Rabbi Yosef. So we see clearly that if it was Oskim al Iske Kiddushela, then we don't need a clear-cut language of Kiddushin. V'yeino tzarech lefarish. So now we have a stira between everything that we've discussed until now, with the suffix about all these lashonos of Kiddushin, and the halacha that we paskin like Rav Yossi says Shmuel of Hayemedaber Ima Beiske Kiddushel. Amri the Gemara answers Li Ola B'Medaber Ima Iske Gito B'Kiddushel. The Yoiv Love the Yoiv Love Shasik. Had she said nothing, is everything would be fine. We would rely on the psak of Rav Yosef that Oskim Yosa Inyan is a valid Kiddushin even without any Lashona. So she should have, sometimes silence is golden. But Hachamais Kidin, she spoke, or shall I say he spoke, and Kolamosiv Gorea, and he messed up by adding something to Yoav Law when he gave her the Kiddushin, Amar Lo Bahani Lishne. He used those Lashonos. And what was our suffix? Hani Lishne Kedusha Kamerle, Odimala Malacha Kamerle. Every one of those Lashonos could imply that he wants her to do Malacha for him. He's hiring her and he's going to pay her wages. And therefore, she's not Mekudeshes. Teku. And in all these cases, we left with Teku about all these Lashonos that are unclear. And again, we re-emphasize, had he said nothing, then shtika would be appropriate here and it would be a valid Kiddushin. But because he used Lashonos that might imply Limalacha, therefore he undermines the Kiddush. Gufa, we learned in the Mishnah, Hayemedaber Ima. Al Iske Gita v'Kiddushel. V'nosan lo Gita v'Kiddushel, v'lo Pirish Rabbi Yossi Omer Daya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tzarech Lefarish. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel vehu. When does Rabbi Yossi's din apply? Shall you oskim be also in that immediately after they discussed the marriage, like will you marry me kind of thing, and then he gave a kiddush. V'chein Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shaya vehu shall you oskim also in. What happens if there was a pesach zman, a separation of time between the Oskim B'Inyan Kiddushin and the actual Nesina? Kitanoi, this is going to be a machlokas tanoi. Rebbe Omer, V'hu shal Oskim B'Oso Inyan. That right now, when he gave her the kesef, he was talking to her about marriage. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, no. Afal pi she'ein Oskim B'Oso Inyan. It wasn't b'Shas Nesina. It was a little bit before Shas Nesina. And Harei Zu Mikudeshes, it's a valid Kiddushin according to Rabbi Elazar of Shimon. So we have a machlokes about when to apply Rabbi Yossi's principle of Hayu Oskim Boso Inyan. Is it only when they're now at the time of the Nesina Oskim, or does Rabbi Yossi's halacha and his principle apply even if they're not Oskim now at the time of the Nesina? Fact the Gemara, I don't understand Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, yesterday they spoke about getting married, but today, they weren't talking about marriage at all. How does she know that she's accepting Kiddushin and Kesef here is Kesef Kiddushin? There are two categories of Oskim Boso Inyan. There's Oskim Ba'oso Inyan of Kiddushin, Mamish, Kiddushin Mamish. Literally, they're talking about marriage. And then there's Me Inyan Le'inyan Ba'oso Inyan. They're talking about, plans down the line, if we get married, and who's going to bring what to the wedding, and what kind of dowry is she going to bring, and what kind of, support is he going to offer, and so forth and so on. And Rabbi Elazar of Shimon holds that since the linkage between Inyan Mamish and Inyan Le'inyan Ba'oso Inyan, that Inyan Le'inyan Ba'oso Inyan before the Nesina is going to be the linkage and the hook to connect the Oskin Ba'oso Inyan with the Nesina of Kidushin. Amar Rav Huna Amar Shmuel Alocha Rav Yosef Amalei Rav Yemar LeRav Ashi the Ela Hadi Amar Rav Yudah Mishmul Kol Sheni Yodeh B'Tiv Git V'Kedush Lo Yeyesek Imoyem Afilu Lo Shmiel Le Hadi Rav Huna Amar Shmuel. In other words, in order to be involved in Seder Kiddushin or in Seder Gerushin, you have to be a Chacham, a Baki in the halachos. They're very complicated. And if we want to test you to see whether you're a Baki, we're going to ask you whether or not Oskin be Oso Inyan is valid, meaning do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi? If you didn't hear about Rabbi Yossi, then you're not a Baki, you're not a Yodea B'Tiv Gitna Kedushin. And Rav Ashi agrees to Rav Yema. Now Shmuel says V'chein B'Gerish Nosan Lo Gita V'Omer Lo Harei At Mishuleches Harei At Migureshes Harei At Mutes Chol Adam Harei Migureshes Pshita Nosan Lo Gita V'Omer Lo Liishto Harei At Baschorin. Oh, wait a minute. A language that's appropriate for shichur of a, in this case, a shivcha, harei baschorin, is certainly not appropriate for kiddushin. And we'll see the reverse is also true, that a valid lashon for kiddushin is not valid for shichur shivcha.